In addition to saying that there was no collusion, the president, as you know, is saying that the results of the election were not impacted. How problematic might this response be for the White House? Because how can they conclude that there was no impact on the election?
Well, we're never going to know whether there was impact. You know, the election was determined by 71,000 votes in 3 states. And when you have as massive a disinformation campaign and an effort to influence voters as the Russians undertook, it's very possible that it did affect the outcome of the election, but we'll never know for sure. His saying there was no collusion is just like when he said that this was a hoax. You know, we'll see. And there's an awful lot to come. There are an awful lot more indictments to come. There are major parts of this investigation that we haven't even heard about yet that relate to the hacking of the DNC emails and all sorts of other strands. But, Alex, what really enrages me about the president's response is that we now have confirmation for all to see that our nation was attacked. This was a Russian Pearl Harbor, an attack at the center of our democracy. And for the president of the United States to just care about himself and how he might fare legally is really reprehensible. It's like if Franklin Roosevelt, after Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, if he had said, well, you know, I didn't have anything to do with the Japanese attack. You know, that's my response. I didn't have anything to do with their attack. No, Franklin Roosevelt said, we've been attacked, and we're going to make sure that we're not attacked again. Yeah, and this president did not do that.
You're making a pretty powerful statement there, an analogy. What do you think of what Jonathan's saying, Sophie? I mean, why does the president not push back harder on this? Why does he seem so reluctant to condemn Russia interference in the election?
2 things. One, I agree with everything Jonathan said, except for I would not liken this to Pearl Harbor. I think they're very different. When I was an attorney, I practiced cyber security law. So I can say this. This was a Pearl Harbor cyber attack. Yes, I would agree with that analogy.
Right. That's what he said.
I know there was no loss of life, you know.
Yes.
Understood.
So, but you and I both know people see things and they interpret them differently, right? So we're going to clean that up. That's number one. Number two, I am old enough to remember I was a freshman in high school when Ronald Reagan became president of the United States. Can you imagine Ronald Reagan getting from the Senate a 98-0 vote to impose sanctions on the Russians before the indictments came out, then post-indictment not facing the American people and saying, Russians, you lied, you did attack us, we might not be able to bring your foreign nationals here to hold them to trial as we'd like to with these indictments, because I doubt Putin's going to turn them over, Alex. And I think that the fact that the president didn't get on TV and say, 1, at the very minimal, I'm imposing the sanctions passed by the Senate, and then 2, I'm going to do these 3 things because you're going to feel our wrath for attacking our sovereignty and the heart of our democracy, which is elections. And then I think one more thing that's important. We're asking the wrong question as Americans. Why? Let's start asking why Donald Trump. Why did the Russians favor Trump? Why did the Russians pose as Republican operatives? Why did the Russians know to use race in a way to drive down black voters? Why? People, wake up. Your democracy is under attack from within and from without. And there was collusion, by the way. It just was unwitting collusion.
To your point, yeah.
Yeah, and more. But there is so much more to come. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the quid pro quo that is at the heart of this case and why I think it's quite likely that there will be Trump associates who go to jail as a result of this, because we've now established that there was a Russian criminal conspiracy, and it's not that hard for prosecutors to show that the Trump people did something in exchange for their help, namely promising to lift sanctions. After the election, they went to the Russians and they basically said, hey, don't worry about Obama's sanctions against you. We're going to lift them when we come in on January 20th. And indeed, they haven't even enforced the sanctions that were passed by the Congress.
And your thoughts on that? I mean, I'll give you the last word, Sophia, before we wrap this up.
No, I mean, he's absolutely right, and I brought this up. I mean, the Senate passed 98-0 these sanctions after the Intel committees, on both sides kind of did their work on this, and they had already come to the conclusion that they had interfered with the election. So what is wrong with the President of the United States that he doesn't want to enforce a 98-0 vote for sanctions against the Russians? Now we've got the proof. It's undisputable. McMaster's has said it this morning, the National Security Advisor. Why people start asking why? Why is he not doing something? You can tell I'm a little upset about this morning.
I'm glad you're asking the why, and I echo those sentiments.